Hey everybody, here's a tank you don't see me in that often. This is the Pz.III 4. Usually I refer to it as the 3/4. I'm platooned up with Serb in his KV-1S, which is still hideously overpowered. In fact, it's probably more overpowered now at tier 5 than it was at tier 6. And Helsor in his Chinokai. This was the beginning, or at least partway through, the 13-game winning streak, which caused Helsor to rage the fuck out for about 5 minutes in TeamSpeak about how bad the West server is, and then rage quit the game because he couldn't possibly have a good match because every single enemy team folded in half before he could do anything. I wish I had recorded it. It was hilarious. Like, I mean, I could understand where he was coming from, but I was trying so hard not to just laugh the whole time, because it's so rare to hear somebody actually complain when the enemy teams are that bad. Usually it's, oh, my team is garbage, not the enemy team is such shit. Why are these people so bad? It got even worse when he was towards the end of the platoon trying to get the ace badge for the mastery of the Su-85I, and he just couldn't do it because he couldn't get enough damage. The enemy team were dying too fast. So right away, Serb takes out a T-28 with a 122mm heat shell to the face, and a Covenanter rolls around the corner directly into my gun. He goes down, the M8's not even firing. If they had any kind of good players, I'd be dead. That Vesper should be shooting at, well, I guess he's shooting at south, because there's some nasty shit going on down there, but seriously, I should have been dead so many times by now. Now I've got a Churchill on the corner. He's not even shooting at me. Fucking Lend-Lease Churchill, one of the strongest tier 5s in the game, and he's just not even firing his gun. So our team has convincingly won the north flank with only a nearly dead M8A1 and a fucking terrible Lend-Lease Churchill to delay them. The south is holding steady against their heavies and in fact doing quite well, and now only the middle of the map needs to be dealt with. Our pubbies can't handle an 85B, so I take care of it for them, and then help the T-14 with the Su-85. He's lucky I was there, because that thing probably would have killed him with its next shot. Churchill's now got his back to me, not that it matters because he's dead already. And the game's already over. There's no way the enemy team can come back from this. So, this wasn't a particularly spectacular game. I just thought I'd upload it because A, it was amusing that Helsor got so angry, and B, I just kind of wanted to show how unbelievably bad West teams can be, particularly in low tier matches. I'd also like to talk about a bit the Pz.III. Talk a bit about the Pz.III 4. Now, I have horrible stats on this thing. This was actually part of an effort to get the win rate back over 50%. The reason being that this was one of the first tanks I played. When the game released, I went straight up the German medium tree to the Panther, which at the time was the top tier 8 medium, and this was the tier 5 in the medium branch. And so I had awful stats on it because I was terrible at playing it. I'm still not that great at this tank, but I'm able to actually use it a little better. The Pz.III 4 is an interesting tank. Now, its gun isn't particularly spectacular, but it's not awful either. It's a very sort of unimpressive, middling sort of gun for tier. It's also not a small target. It's a big, boxy thing. It's quite large, actually, for a medium tank at tier 5. It doesn't have particularly great camo. Its armor is more or less non-existent. So you would ask, what makes this tank worth playing? Well, its mobility, actually, is what makes this tank worth playing. Even back in the old days of beta, this tank was a fucking rocket sled. It was actually one of the fastest tanks in low tiers back during beta, before proper suspension physics and all that, back when you just slid along the ground magically. It still handles really well even now. A lot of tanks were kind of fucked over by the addition of physics. The T-34, I would say, is one of them. Obviously, the really sort of speed-dependent light tanks like the T-50-II, that was another one. This thing actually fared pretty well, and it still is quite a decent tank. While it doesn't have a particularly impressive gun, in fact, I think it even has really bad DPM. It's not the worst gun in tier, but it's really not very good. While it doesn't have the gun to rely on like some of the other tier 5 mediums, it does actually have quite good mobility, and so it can get around things quickly and pop up in places where it's not really expected. It plays the role of a support tank fairly well. The one thing I actually should note before I wrap this up, I'm not going to make this a big spiel about the tank or anything. I'm going to have another replay of it anyway very soon. I'd just like to point out that this tank is, for all the people that say the Germans are only ever unfairly nerfed and yada yada yada, historically this tank could not traverse its turret fully. It was, I believe, an economizing measure. Instead of putting in a proper slip ring, they just made a 270 degree traversing turret, so you would essentially have the same sort of turret issues as the T-28 Proto has. Now, this has been in the game since at least very early beta. It may have even been in the game pretty much from early alpha. I wouldn't know, I got in early beta, so whatever happened in alpha stays in alpha, I guess. I don't know about it. But my point is, this is one of the oldest tanks in the game. And it comes from a time where limited turret traverse was the thing that only fixed casemate tank destroyers and artillery had. Anything with a turret that I can think of that existed back then had full traverse. The American line with the T-28 Proto wasn't added until considerably later. I can't think of any examples of Soviet or German tanks that actually did have limited traverse, so yeah, it wouldn't have been a thing back then. I guess as time went on with the introduction of things like the T-28 Proto and the T-110E4, and then in particular when they brought in the new Soviet medium line, the Pz.//, and the... it escapes me right now, the Pz.//, variant 2. Obviously they also have limited traverse turrets and they're mediums. I suspect that's sort of when Wargaming thought, hey, let's try this out and just see how it works. I could understand why they'd be reluctant to put that feature on a medium. It kind of is counterintuitive for a tank that relies on mobility and being able to get around and point its gun at shit that a heavy can't. But honestly, since I brought the issue up, it's not really much of a problem. I could see this working with only 270 degrees of turret traverse. In fact, I could see a lot of mediums working like that. The reason I say this is that a lot of mediums already have depression issues over the back of their tank. The E50, the Centurion, the 4202, the Pz.//, there's a lot of tanks, there are a lot of tanks, including some of the Japanese ones actually, that cannot depress their guns over their engine deck in a roughly 90 degree arc. So essentially, unless you want to aim up at something instead of down, you already effectively have only 270 degrees of turret traverse. Obviously the big sort of glaring fault with that statement, I guess, is that you can actually have your turrets just track somebody all the way around. So in that regard, a 270 degree turret would be a bit of a hindrance. You would have to make sure that you keep people in that area where you still have traversability. If somebody actually gets around the back of you, you'd be in trouble, because then you've got to traverse it all the way back around the other way. But because you're in a medium tank, and a very mobile one at that, I think this thing can mount grouses. I can't remember, but I'm pretty sure it can. So that, I'm not saying do it, I'm not saying it's a good idea, but it's designed to be mobile. So I think it might possibly work. If you recall me talking about the Pz.//, back when I was grinding through that, and even some of my videos, the limited turret traverse, which is quite limited in the 416, it's only 170 degrees if I recall correctly, so it's not even a full 180. That almost never turned out to be a problem, because, I mean, you're a medium tank. You can traverse your hull so quickly that you can just turn your tank instead of having to rely on turning a turret. And if you're circle strafing somebody, you really don't need to aim that far behind you anyway. With the 416, there was an art to it. You kind of spiral in towards them, obviously because you don't have full 180 degree traverse. With the 430 variant 2, you didn't have to worry about that. You could just hold distance and sort of orbit them. With a 270 degree turret, it doesn't even matter. You can circle them however the fuck you want, and just as long as you don't get too far away from them, you're not going to have any issues. So yeah, all the people who cry about German tanks constantly being unrealistically nerfed, this one has actually been unrealistically buffed, so to speak, ever since it was added to the game over 3.5 years ago. And I would actually love to see some of these people try and play it if it only had the 270 degree turret traverse it historically had. I don't think Wargaming plan on changing it. I do think it was brought up at some point and they said they were going to leave it alone. I don't care either way, personally. If they did change it to 270 degrees, I would see that as an interesting quirk rather than some horrible, terrible nerf, but I'm certainly not going to complain if they choose to leave it the way it is. Anyway, as I said, this isn't going to be a full-on discussion about this tank because I have another replay of it actually to upload, so I'm going to go record that right now. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video, best of luck on the field, and I will see you next time.